went to McDonald's, you saw Delma.
She actually looked as if she had been in a plane crash.
People were in shock. They were stunned. They were scared. You know, who could do this?
The attack was very personal. You had an extremely violent homicide, 200 yards from the police department.
Is it someone that maybe had worked there before? We didn't know, but all of it was possible.
These were good old Southern boys that had no concept of anything but their own little lives.
Could he have killed her? Well, yes, until we proved otherwise.
Germantown, Tennessee, a sleepy suburb of Memphis. A great place to raise a family.
Germantown is one of the more exclusive areas for this section of Tennessee.
Very nice area. One of those places that still has backdoor garbage pickup.
Stats show it's among the safest communities in Tennessee, a world away from the big city just a few miles to the east.
Crimes in Germantown ranged anywhere from mailbox vandalisms to auto burglaries.
If you're going to speed, don't do it in Germantown.
The streets roll up when the sun goes down. And by 10 p.m., it's dead quiet. "4 a.m. 59-year-old Emma Owens arrives for the morning shift at McDonald's. Her manager and best friend Delma Ramsey is always there to let her in.
She had knocked on the door with no response. So she'd gotten back in the car and drove around the building a couple times.
Delma's car is in the parking lot, and the two spoke on the telephone just an hour earlier. Emma's worried. She calls the police. Patrolman Bruce Cannon responds.
We walked around the exterior of the restaurant to see if we could see anything. We looked in the side window of the drive-through booth and saw her laying on the floor. So we checked the door on the north side of the building, and we found it to be unlocked. I was the first one to walk into the restaurant. Went in, found Miss Ramsey lying on the floor. I could tell she had been assaulted.
Delma's been beaten around the head and looks like she's been strangled. Suddenly, Cannon stops. There's a gurgling sound.
I could see her breathing. I could tell she was still alive, but it was very labored breathing, and she did not look like she would survive much longer from what I could tell. I contacted dispatch. I told them to expedite paramedics there to save her.
Delma Ramsey's life hangs by a thread.
Paramedics did everything they could to save her on the scene, but that wreaks havoc on a crime scene.
She's rushed to the hospital in critical condition.
WREC News. In Germantown, a McDonald's employee found beaten and strangled overnight has now died of her injuries. Assistant manager Delma Ramsey was found unconscious.
Well, I called my brother. and he came and picked me up. But I knew that she had already passed because we were listening to the radio going in. By then, the news was pretty much saying that she had been murdered.
Delma dies before she can tell anyone who killed her. The loyal McDonald's employee was only 49 years old.
Any officers that worked midnight shift or in the morning knew her because if you went to McDonald's, you saw Delma. Delma was always very friendly, always had a smile on her face, spoke to you when you come through. She was very friendly.
The fact that it happened in Germantown, just the simple fact that you had an extremely violent homicide at a fast food restaurant in the center of town, 200 yards from the police department, it made it a pretty shocking crime.
For a police department used to handing out speeding tickets, solving a homicide won't be easy. Memphis and Tennessee State Police are called in to help. Soon, the Golden Arches is swarming with detectives and forensic specialists.
It was stranger than any scene I'd been to in Germantown when I got to McDonald's that morning. There were a lot more officers than there were usually at any other crime scene that I stumbled upon. This department didn't handle very many homicides that were unsolved or that the suspect wasn't standing right there or, in a murder-suicide case, laying right there.
Any money that was in the restaurant was gone. So to us, that indicated that there was a robbery.
It appeared to be that someone was after money, unless someone just wanted to kill her. And you have to consider that too.
By daylight, police know $1,200 is missing. Someone took the money and Delma's life. But who?
When I arrived at the scene, what I saw was a very disturbed scene that was going to be very difficult to unravel. Typically, those places aren't really good for fingerprints because there's greasy materials there which interfere with fingerprints being found. Blood stains weren't very helpful because even the blood will bead up on an oily surface.
When we're there, we're seeing bloody footprints that we don't know if that's the killer or if it's the paramedics. So we had to take shoe impressions of all the paramedics that were on the scene that day to rule those footprints out.
There was no forced entry into the store, so we knew that Miss Ramsey, she had to have let the killer or killers in. So it's obvious someone, we figured that she knew.
Outside, the police find a set of keys on a nearby grassy area.
The keys did have blood on them. We obviously thought that the killer had used the keys to unlock the door, to let himself out, and thrown the keys away.
Other than one bloody footprint, there was nothing that just stood out. There were no smoking guns because there was no weapon to indicate, who had done it or how they had done it.
When the word got out that someone had been murdered, really in the center of town, people were in shock. They were stunned. They were scared. Who could do this?
She was a wonderful person. It's just like, I don't understand how things like this happen to good people, and there's other people in the world who walk around and nothing happens to them, who do horrible things. It just doesn't make any sense.
She was a very nice person. Very nice, and she's in the past she's done a lot for my kids and everything.
Did Delma die in a robbery gone bad? Or did the nicest employee at McDonald's have enemies? For now, the cops consider everyone in town to be a suspect. Delma Ramsey has been murdered working the graveyard shift at a McDonald's. It's the first homicide in years, and Germantown police pull out all the stops. Detective Danny Payne is in charge.
We had a team of 5 or 6 detectives, but We had not worked major homicides like this where there were no suspects on the scene.
Rookie Detective Lee Covey has a good idea of where to start.
The First Tennessee Bank, which is just across the street from McDonald's, it has, you know, an ATM. We found out that that ATM video ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
The quality of the video was not good because that type camera was not made to shoot the distance that we were looking for.
But in the murky footage, the first hints of what happened that fatal night emerge.
We actually saw the victim drive onto the lot, but based on the headlights and the tail lights, we were able to determine that that was her car.
The ATM footage shows Delma Ramsey's car pulling into the parking lot at 2:22 a.m. Everything appears to be routine. McDonald's has been Delma Ramsey's life for 25 years.
When we first got married, she didn't work. She started working for McDonald's in 71 or 72 just because she got tired of sitting around the house. She seemed to really like working with younger kids, you know. That's what she kind of liked. She'd talk about them all the time, but Delma got along with everybody.
And she did well. As assistant manager, she would arrive shortly after 2 a.m. each day to get the restaurant ready for opening. Not only does the ATM footage show Delma arriving, but something else.
With the stick people or stick person on there, we knew that someone had entered the south side of the building and that Miss Ramsey had to let them in. So if she let them in, then she knew.
Finding that shadowy figure could mean finding the killer. The bloody keys the killer used to get out of the restaurant reveal another clue.
The perpetrators had let themselves out of the building. So you would think, is it someone that maybe had worked there before?
It's company policy to keep every door locked at all times after hours.
Did they demand the keys and she gave them the key that would let them out? We didn't know, but all of it was possible.
Medical examiner Dr. O.C. Smith details the horror of Delma's attack.
She actually looked as if she had been in either a car wreck or a plane crash without using a safety belt. The injuries were primarily in the head and neck. Her face has a mid-face fracture in which the area from the bridge of the nose down to the upper jaw has been pushed back. After looking at the head and the skeletal injuries, examination of the neck indicated that a ligature had been placed about her neck and that had enough force applied to it that it would have had the ability to strangle her.
The attack was very personal. Anytime someone is attacked without a weapon in this manner, it shows that there's some relationship there. So you've got to look at anybody that had any connection to Delma.
That means tracking down McDonald's employees past and present. Detectives start with Emma Owens, the last person to speak to Delma Ramsey. The women were like family. Emma and Delma worked together on the morning shift for the past 5 years.
Delma referred to her as either mom or grandma, one of the two. She's a little bit older, and Delma gave her easier jobs out in the lobby and all that.
Delma even hired Emma's grandsons. She called the boys her brothers. When questioned by the police, Emma remembers something strange about that night. She says she received her usual wake-up call from Delma at 3 a.m.
Good morning, Emma. It's Delma. This is your 3 o'clock wake-up call. I'll see you at work soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.
15 minutes later, she received a second call.
The second phone call came in 12 to 15 minutes after the first phone call. She described it as gurgling sounds on the other end. We looked at her caller ID, and it indicated that that second phone call came from McDonald's. So if that's the case, one would assume that it was maybe an accidental redial that happened during or after the initial attack.
And we believe that in the attack on Miss Ramsey, that the phone was either knocked off, they hit redial, something happened electronically that there's a call that went back to Miss Owens. We asked her about her grandsons who had worked at McDonald's. And she had stated that they had left a few weeks before and went to Decatur, Illinois to live with their other side of the family.
Over the next few weeks, investigators check out more than 100 past and present McDonald's employees.
Obviously, they were important because we needed to know what they knew.
We worked at least 20 days straight. There were a lot of things going on, a lot of activity.
There were some employees there that had criminal backgrounds. One person had been convicted of a murder, served his time, and was back out working. But when you see someone that's convicted one murder, you think it's possible, could they do two murders?
The ex-con angle doesn't pan out, and none of the other employees have a bad word to say about their boss or a motive for killing her. The police now turn their attention to Delma's husband.
There's so many homicides that are related to someone killing someone they knew. So in that instance, we went to the family. We went to the husband, Dennis Ramsey.
50-year-old Dennis Ramsey works in construction. He and Delma had been together for 31 years.
Met in high school. She went to one high school, I went to another one, and my cousin went to her high school, and my cousin introduced me to her.
The couple worked opposite shifts, so they had separate bedrooms.
Sometimes we go 4 or 5 days, sometimes we go a week without seeing each other, until the weekend.
The police called Dennis in for questioning.
Dennis was very cooperative. He was very helpful. He was very honest. We found some past on Mr. Ramsey, like in the 70s. He was involved with some school bus burnings. You know, when you see that, you think, well, that's pretty, that could be very serious. Was that just one person? Was it a prank, or was it something to do with the war, or whatever?
They thought naturally I was a suspect. Everybody was. And so they talked to me for probably a half hour or an hour.
We eventually polygraphed him once, twice, 3 times, and he always passed. And we just couldn't come up with the motive of why he wanted her dead.
The case is going nowhere. The police can't find anyone to tie to Delma Ramsey's murder. 10 days after the homicide, something promising. A call to Crime Stoppers hotline.
We received a tip. It was a girl that worked at a local restaurant and was bragged that she had killed the lady.
The suspect is 19-year-old Chantal Amour.
And we interviewed her. She was a member of a gang. She was a loudmouth.
This person was very relaxed about whether she was involved or not. We had her in the interview room for probably an hour or so. She would occasionally get texts from her friends, who knew that she'd gone with us, to be interviewed, and it was just sort of entertaining for her.
She was just running her yap. I'm big enough. I could have killed someone. I'm important. I'm bad. It was all just talk.
We had released to the media that it was a violent attack, but we'd never released the fact that she was stomped.
It becomes clear that Chantal Amour has no inside knowledge of the crime and isn't connected. 6 months in, and the police have little to show.
There was no witnesses. It's a mystery murder.
A mystery with a ghostly image of the killers taunting detectives.
We just thought, it may go unsolved.
And we looked at the possibility of, could this be a vagrant who may have just stopped here, robbed the business, killed Miss Ramsey, and then got on a train. We would never know who they were unless we had some type of trace evidence. And so we always kept that in the back of our minds, that this may be an unsolved homicide.
Unless the cops catch a break, someone in Germantown will get away with murder. "246 interviews later, Germantown police are no closer to finding the killer of Delma Ramsey. In desperation, they go back to square one.
After we had exhausted most of our leads, we began going back through the original file and trying to see what we had missed. And this phone call was found. It was called into the police department a couple of weeks after the homicide.
An anonymous tip points the finger at two people who haunt the McDonald's parking lot at night. Ron Siegel and his wife, Mary Musket.
The phone call was specific about Ron and Mary.
Miss Musket owned a Crabtree and Evelyn lotion shop, retail business, just about a half a block away from McDonald's.
The tip said that they would be on the lot at 4 o'clock in the morning. They were on the McDonald's lot because Mary fed and took care of a group of feral cats that lived in the back by the dumpster. Most people in Germantown are in the bed at 4 in the morning. I don't know. I mean, that to me, in and of itself is a little odd.
The detectives decide to take a second look at the fuzzy security camera footage for any sign of the cat-loving couple.
The videotape indicated that their car was on the lot shortly after the homicide or right around the time of the homicide.
And we can see that she comes through the drive-thru at 2 a.m. And then we see her car again right at 3:30 a.m. going through the drive-thru.
So certainly we want to talk to them about what they might have seen or might not have seen.
Police learn there was no love lost between Siegel and Delma Ramsey.
According to the tip, Ron Siegel went to the drive-thru and he didn't receive his utensils the way he wanted it. And there was an argument ensued between Ron Siegel and Delma Ramsey over a stir stick. And he made a remark, "What should I stir this to for my d-?"
Let me see your manager. Get it out of my face.
That's not necessarily motive to kill someone, but anger is anger.
Your employee sucks.
Being an animal lover is not a crime, nor is it a motive for murder. Unless there is more to the story.
We found out that there had been verbal altercation where Delma had told Ron and Mary to stop feeding the cats because it was becoming a problem. And Ron and Mary didn't want to stop feeding the cats.
Even more damning, just days before the murder, Ron Siegel faced off over the cats at a meeting at City Hall.
There was an issue with the Animal Control Board in feeding wild animals, which is against the regulation for obvious reasons. And Ron Siegel had attended that meeting. He had a sharp wit and a sharp tongue about it.
It's the first lead that ties the victim to someone with a grudge. And in this small southern town outside of Memphis, the couple stands out like a sore thumb. Ron is 30. Mary is 47.
Mary Musket told us that she met Ron Siegel on the internet. Back then in 97, to meet someone on the internet, to me it was odd. To us it was odd. It's not odd today, but then it was. At that time, he lived in Canada, and so he'd made his way down here where they met physically, and eventually they got married.
Mary was a very quiet person. She seemed not outgoing at all, almost reserved.
Ron Siegel works part-time for his wife and kills a lot of his time in coffee shops.
Ron Siegel was almost a nocturnal animal. I mean, he was up all night and slept all day. The initial tip on Ron Siegel was like a light bulb going off for us. It's like, here's a guy close by, knows the victim, has had an argument with the victim, so this could be motive where he could have killed her. And so we were really excited.
The animal lovers are hauled in for questioning. Detectives begin with the night of the murder.
They initially told us they didn't hear or see anything. They indicated that they were on the lot, that they were feeding the cats as usual. It was nothing out of the ordinary for them. They said they didn't see any other vehicles, didn't see any other activity.
Police think that Delma caught Ron and Mary feeding the cats again. They argue. Only this time, Siegel saw red and attacked her. To cover their tracks, the murder was staged to look like a robbery.
They knew the inside and outside of the building. He had an argument with Miss Ramsey. Could he have killed her? Well, yes, until we proved otherwise.
Once we started finding out about the interactions and the conflicts between Ron and Mary and with Delma, we started looking a little further. We asked Ron to take a polygraph test, and Ron failed the polygraph test.
And he looked at us and made the statement, I didn't kill Miss Ramsey, but let's say I did kill her. Can you protect me in prison? The hair went up on my neck. I said, this guy's fixing to tell us he did it.
6 months in, and the Germantown police think they have their killer. But can they prove the mysterious figure caught on camera is actually Ron Siegel? McDonald's assistant manager Delma Ramsey was almost certainly murdered by someone she knew. Detectives think that someone is cat lover Ron Siegel, aided and abetted by his wife, Mary Musket.
At that point, we're looking for anything that could tie to the homicide.
And we'd established enough probable cause at that time to get a judge to sign a search warrant for his home.
When they came to search the house, they come flying up the stairs, and literally I got tackled by 5 cops. And next thing you know, I'm in cuffs, no shirt on.
When we served the search warrant, we knew there were a number of cats in the house, but we didn't know that there were that many cats in the house.
We had to call animal control. And so once animal control was able to contain the cats, we were able to go into the home and begin searching.
We had a lot of cats, and we didn't have the heart to give them away to anybody. So yeah, it ended up being somewhere in the neighborhood of probably 20.
Mary Musket and Ron Siegel were, in my opinion, pack rats, so they saved a little bit of everything. If not the cleanest place, in my opinion.
The smell inside the house was very very strong, you know, from the cats being in there, and so I remember having to use the Vicks Vapor Rub to, you know, try to keep that under control.
The police search for anything that might link the couple to the crime.
One thing that was found was a piece of rope that had been tied in a knot. We took that as evidence to determine if it, by chance, matched a knot that was found on the scene with the victim.
In one of the rooms, there were stacks of newspapers, and in some of those newspapers, there was a stack of the articles related to the McDonald's homicide.
We found what we thought might be something potential, like some pants with like it was blood on it.
News spreads fast that the misfit couple are prime suspects in Delma's murder.
You can't park on a residential street without word getting out. We were there for several hours, and there were more media people there than us.
Them becoming the prime suspects really came to a head when they did the search warrant on the house.
Musket and Siegel are not about to go down without a fight.
It is really horrible. I am totally humiliated about it. The fact that people have come into my home and business and searched it, it made me feel like a criminal.
They took it upon themselves to go to the news media and announce to the world that they were considered suspects and that they had nothing to do with the homicide. So they really brought a lot of the heat on themselves, really.
The people of Germantown absolutely knew that we were being investigated. It's funny, it was like people chose teams, almost.
It wasn't that people were willing to say they did it, but it was just kind of like they could have. They could have done it.
In the court of public opinion, the couple are deemed guilty as charged. However, investigators hit a problem.
After the analysis of the clothing and things we took out of the house, after the polygraphs, we just felt like he did it. We can't prove it. So we kept him in the box. But after the testing was done, it was not human blood.
Without that forensic evidence linking Ron Siegel to the murder scene, the case stalls. It stays stalled for almost a year. Until a tip comes in that takes detectives back to the very beginning.
18 months after the homicide, Memphis Crime Stoppers receives a Crime Stoppers tip stating that Robert Evans and someone named Reese were responsible for the McDonald's homicide. We go back through the case file, realize Robert Evans was a former employee, determined Reese is Maurice Lane, and he's a former employee, and these are both the grandsons of Emma Owens.
Emma Owens, the same woman who called the police on the night of the murder.
But Emma Owens had alibied them as being out of town in Illinois at the time of the homicide.
Emma Owens' grandsons were well known to Delma. She considered them family. This might explain Delma opening the door to her killer.
When we got this tip, it was like a lightning bolt to us.
They were both in custody on different crimes in different cities in Illinois. So the next day, we were on the road and went to Illinois, where Maurice Lane was incarcerated. I spoke to him first.
And just like that, Lane spills the beans. Most of them, anyway.
What specifically did he tell you he was going to do?
He was going to, he kept telling me, well, he would specifically tell me what he was going to do. He kept telling me what he needed. He kept saying he needed some money. He kept needing money.
Maurice told us he knew why we were there. He said that his grandmother had called his mother, and his mother told him to tell the truth about what had happened.
No, he went in, he said, damn, I asked him, why you up here? He's like, I'm coming to work early. I'm coming to help you out. I guess she didn't think nothing about it. She went on to the back.
I didn't fully believe his sequence of events, but we knew that we were on the right track.
Did you accompany Robert Lee Jr. to McDonald's to perpetrate this crime?
No, sir.
Did you help him before, during, or after this crime?
No, sir. Not there.
say nothing. I ain't say nothing about doing nothing like that. Cause I wouldn't think about doing nothing like that. And really to look at a situation like that anyway, I couldn't consider myself doing something like that to damn her anyway, knowing I've been so close to her by all the times I was working with her. I mean, I wouldn't just been bringing myself down. I've been, you know what I'm saying? I've done something wrong. Then I put my grandmother down. I couldn't do nothing like that.
From the prison that we were at where Maurice was, we go to Decatur, Illinois, where Robert was in custody on actually another homicide.
Robert Lee Evans has been charged with stabbing his best friend 20 times in a dispute over a car stereo. Now it's his turn to face detectives.
Robert was obviously a more hardened criminal than Maurice. When we spoke to him, told him we'd already spoken to Maurice, actually showed him portions of a videotape from Maurice, he decided that he would talk to us.
Both point the finger at each other.
Just came to see what was going on. I just saying hi to her. She said hi, whatever. I asked her for a drink. She gave me a drink. But she wouldn't let me into the store. You know, I went on back to the car. I told Maurice about it. She wouldn't let me into the store. She was like, how come she wouldn't let you in? Like, he was determined for me to get in. You know what I'm saying? But then he was like, well, I'm going to go see if I can get in. She'll let me in.
And he said that then Maurice got out and went to the door, and Miss Ramsey let him in, and he killed her and took the money.
So about a good 20 minutes later, about a good 20 or 30 minutes later, I seen him come walking back from around the door. He came onto the car. He was like, come on, Rob, let's ride. I don't really know exactly how much it was. But he counted the money. I was steady saying, man, this some bad, man.
Two stories, two possible murderers. Neither man admits being at the scene of the crime. Police believe one or both is lying. But which one is the shadowy figure in the ATM footage? After nearly 2 years, the Germantown police are on the verge of solving the Delma Ramsey murder. In the frame are Maurice Lane and Robert Evans, the grandsons of Delma Ramsey's best friend, Emma Owens. The police suspect Owens has known the truth all along.
After we had gotten the statements from Maurice and Robert, we went back and talked to Emma, and Emma essentially says that she must have made a mistake and that they left for Decatur that day. She says she thought that they were out of town, but apparently they were in town and left right afterwards.
We believe that Miss Owens either knew that directly or felt it, that something was wrong, and she had talked to them, and they left town, which flight is the indication of guilt.
When the police delve into the boy's background, they find a shady past.
The Evans and Lane family, by and large, we just call them a crime family. They did work at McDonald's prior to this. They were grandsons of the woman who knew Miss Ramsey the best. They were two people that, in hindsight, that Miss Ramsey would have led into the building because they were her grandsons, and they left town the day after the murder.
It now appears that the boys fled to Illinois to escape from the police investigation. If Emma Owens knows which boy killed her best friend, she's not telling.
There was not enough evidence to issue arrest warrants, so we had to arrange another trip.
Delma knew Robert and Maurice very well. There's no question she would have let them in the store. She would have treated them like sons.
The detectives returned to the prison in Illinois. To seal the case, they need more from their prime suspects.
Robert Lee, when we first sat down with him, black eyes and a black heart. Showed no remorse about anything. To me, totally devoid of feeling toward human beings. And myself and Jim Bruce interviewed Mr. Evans for several hours.
This time, Evans tells a different story. This time, Evans says that both he and Maurice entered the restaurant.
It was like, you know what I'm saying, the plan when we get in there, when she opened the safe, he'll take care of her, I get all the money, and we get out as quick as possible.
He never admitted to the killing. He said he was with Maurice Lane, and Maurice Lane did the killing, which in Tennessee, you're guilty of the same thing. You know, he thought he'd be scot-free, but in fact, he's implicated in the murder.
I just thought maybe he'd grab her, take her in another room, or hold her down, or something. I really didn't. Just thought he'd just get her out the way while I took the money.
You know, we're not showing like, hey, we finally got you, and, you know, we rah, rah, rah. Let's just talk about this. Because, you know, they have a right to talk or not talk with an attorney, and he chose to talk.
Just like his accomplice, Maurice Lane changes his story.
There were certain things about Maurice's story that held more true based on the evidence than what Robert had told us. They were out riding around, smoking marijuana. Delma was at the restaurant by herself. They went to the store. Robert went in. Maurice said they were parked in a certain area of the parking lot where the keys were used.
Robert Lee told Maurice that he went to go behind the counter in the office, and Miss Ramsey told him he couldn't come back there. And obviously started beating her about the head and the face. Robert Lee eventually killed her and took the money. I believe that Maurice Lane knew that Robert Lee was going to get the money. I don't think he really thought about during the robbery would Robert Lee kill Miss Ramsey.
I kept on asking, I said, man, what you do, man, what you do? He looked at me and he gave me like one of them faces, you know what I'm saying, like a frown or something. And he was like, man, I did it, man. I was like, man, what you do, man? How you come up out of there all bloody and all this stuff like that? He was like, man, I think I beat her kind of bad, Joe. I ain't, you know what I'm saying? All the time while he's saying he beat her bad, he's shaking his head, you know what I'm saying?
Maurice's confession explains the bloody keys found near a neighboring restaurant.
And where he was sitting, he saw Robert Lee with his left hand throw the keys. So it all fit like a puzzle. He went to the back of the store, got in the car, and drove off.
Robert Lee Evans and Maurice Lane are charged with murdering Delma Ramsey for a mere $1,200. Detectives believe Evans was the actual killer. During the trial, Emma Owens insists she knew nothing about her grandson's killing her close friend.
I said, honey, if grandmama had got there earlier than she usually do and had seen you there, would you have had to kill her too? I said, because had I seen you there, you know, I would have turned you in.
Robert Lee Evans is found guilty and sentenced to life without parole. Maurice Lane gets 5 years in exchange for cooperating with the police.
Maurice and Robert are charged with the same crime. Maurice, because of his cooperation and the fact that we don't think that he actually committed the act itself, was allowed to have a plea bargain.
The prosecution asked the jury to sentence Evans to execution. It seems like a sure thing. But the jury is deadlocked. they can't agree to send Robert Lee Evans to death.
Since they were deadlocked, the judge said he had no choice but to remove the death penalty from consideration. After that was removed, the jury went back, deliberated, and in less than 30 minutes came back with a sentence of life without the possibility of parole.
There was one woman on the jury that brought race on the jury. And her deal was, there's enough black children on death row, or black men on death row in Tennessee, I won't put another one there. And that's one of the most racist comments I ever heard in my life.
For Ron Siegel and Mary Musket, it's the end of a nightmare.
I guess this is the part where I'm supposed to say that I understand and that I forgive. I'm not going to say that. They were looking for an easy way to solve something that was very complicated because not one of them on the Germantown police force had any experience in investigating murder. I mean, I remember for the longest time, during and after, it took me probably 5 years before I could hear a siren and not tense right up and like be terrified. You know, I'd hear a siren years later even, and it just, it'd wake me up and I'd wake up in a sweat because of it. I couldn't believe the stupidity. I couldn't. There's no other word for it.
If you drive by the McDonald's in Germantown, you remember that, yeah, they had a homicide there. You remember, you may not remember her name, but you remember that there was one there.
This whole thing destroyed our marriage, destroyed our business, destroyed my faith in the police. To this day, I do not trust the police for any reason whatsoever.
Ron Siegel moves back to Canada. For the rest of the community, life goes back to normal. Almost.
I lived and breathed it. You know, day and night, it consumed me. It was like, this is our reward, because there's nothing better than finding the bad guy who's responsible and bringing them to justice.
I don't think it was just a spur-of-the-moment thing. I think that robbery had been talked about for a long time. It's just something you got to live with. I accepted living without Delma. Accepted living by myself. I probably live the rest of my life by myself.